Sound of Freedom is a 2023 crime thriller starring Jim Caviezel. The film centers around the true-life figure Tim Ballard, an ex-Homeland Security investigator who pursued a life of vigilance to stop child trafficking under the organization known as Operation Underground Railroad. The movie was in development at 20th Century Fox and completed shooting in 2018. In 2019, Disney acquired Fox and decided to shelve the film. The film's producers spent years trying to reattain the rights from Disney and shopped it elsewhere. Sound of Freedom would ultimately be sold to Angel Studios, known for appealing to a predominantly Christian Mormon audience. They agreed to buy the rights and crowdfunded a campaign to push the film into theaters. The film would debut in American theaters on July 4th, 2023. Despite the competition, Sound of Freedom made enough money to be #1 at the box office for one day, and only by a mere $2.5 million. But a success is a success, and the conservative Christian crowd who was rallying around this film ran with that headline as their positive press. But there was another type of press the film gained. Other outlets had reported that Sound of Freedom's central figure, Tim Ballard, and the people behind the movie were pushing the QAnon movement, which uses child trafficking activism as all the justification they need to concoct the most absurd of conspiracy theories. And rather than confront these claims and critically prove that these beliefs did not hinder the film, the devoted audience and promoters of Sound of Freedom took the easy route and simply declared all this bad press as fake news. But there is plenty of evidence to support that Sound of Freedom is a Trojan horse for right-wing conspiracies. Let's start with the film's distributor, because there's a very good reason why Angel Studios decided to distribute this film theatrically. Angel Studios was initially known in 2014 as VidAngel. The then company aimed to sell edited versions of popular Hollywood movies to Mormons. Although they were intentionally breaking copyright law by doing this, VidAngel tried to find legal loopholes around being fined for illegally editing movies. After being sued by the studios and eventually settling on an amount to be paid, VidAngel stopped editing services and focused on creating original media projects through Angel Studios. Angel Studios started off small in 2017 with their stand-up comedy show Dry Bar Comedy, an inoffensive, boomer-friendly version of stand-up comedy that could be watched with the family. Their first major narrative TV series, and arguably their most significant success to date, was 2019's The Chosen, a historical drama based around the Christian Bible stories of Jesus and other notable figures. Later on, Angel Studios adapted the children's book series The Tuttle Twins. The book series centered on two children learning history, politics, and economics. In truth, these are books written from a Mormon libertarian perspective. This becomes incredibly obvious in The Tuttle Twins and The Search for Atlas. This book isn't even trying to cover up the fact that it's pushing Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, as it outright admits this in the description. Rand's philosophy was kinda gross, considering that she promoted the virtues of selfishness. That's not an exaggeration of words either. She literally wrote a book called The Virtues of Selfishness. And no, it's not satire. The book's author, Connor Boyack, is also more than just some author trying to teach kids about these topics. He's the president of the free market think tank known as Libertas Institute, and according to his website, he describes himself as a freedom fighter and thought leader, and he's exactly as annoying as you'd expect for having those labels. Also, he spends way too much time on Twitter posting right-wing garbage memes and articles. Also, the crowdfunding campaign for the cartoon of the Tuttle Twins is one of the most embarrassing capitalist bootlicking videos I've ever seen. The studio's next animation production was The Wingfeather Saga, a fantasy adventure based on a series of books about a family of cryptozoologists. The show would hire Doug Tennepool as an illustrator. If that name sounds familiar, that's because he's the guy behind Earthworm Jim and Neverhood. So this probably sounds like a good get, right? Well, the sad truth is that Tennepool had transformed into a right-wing recluse by this point in time. He had spent years writing for Breitbart, a website so grossly far-right that even right-wing commentator Ben Shapiro wouldn't work for them. Tennepool would boldly pronounce being homophobic and transphobic to the point where artists simply refused to work with him. And then he went through all the same right-wing talking points. He downplayed January 6th, he promoted paranoia about vaccines, and so so much more. Knowing this, it's not a surprise why his Earthworm Jim revival died. My point in bringing up these productions is that Angel Studios has no scruples about who they're going to work with. This does not mean that they only hire right-wing dorks or propagandist libertarians with a Randian bent, but the studio sure does seem to be uncritical about these aspects. It's like that saying about Republicans, how not all Republicans are racist, but all racists vote Republican. It's something that you should be more knowing of when an organization will not question who they associate with. It also perfectly illustrates the issues of those involved with Sound of Freedom. Namely, the biggest problem is its actor and the real-life figure who are both believers in the cult of QAnon. But before we go any further, let's first describe what QAnon is so there's no confusion. The reason why will become apparent shortly. QAnon is a right-wing conspiracy about a mysterious user named Q who dropped clues about government secrets regarding child trafficking, hidden politicians faking their deaths, shadowy government actions, and the infamous frazzle drip theory, that there somehow exists a video of Hillary Clinton drinking the blood of children. QAnon's information came through various drops on the image board 8chan. It's like 4chan, but even worse considering the gross people who occupy it. It's a haven for underage pornography, grotesque discussions, and occupied by the worst of humanity. The irony of Q's followers using this website to combat child trafficking is too rich for words. QAnon has been proven time and time again to be little more than nonsense at best and dangerous rhetoric at its worst. If you want a more complete picture, there's a great documentary series called Q, Into the Storm, which better documents this phenomenon and the people behind it. QAnon is kind of posed like Fight Club, where the first rule is you do not talk about QAnon. The obscurity gives the movement a coat of ambiguity. That way, someone trying to defend a QAnon figure can play dumb by saying that they think it's a made-up word. Or they might only know of QAnon because somebody mentioned the movement and was against child trafficking. And child trafficking is bad, therefore QAnon must be good since they're combating it. But being against child trafficking is just the carrot for QAnon, though. QAnon follows a familiar pattern of conspiracy theory by rooting it in an initial truth. It takes something that is real and concerning, that being child trafficking, and then tries to convince you that part of child trafficking involves Tom Hanks consuming child blood. Why would QAnon lie about that? After all, they're against child trafficking, and if you'll believe that conspiracy, then Q can convince you to believe in the next absurd claim, and then the next one, and the next one. And this provides a perfect cover. If you're against Q, then the devout can simply claim you're promoting child trafficking by not joining in this movement. Similarly, this has been the primary defense of Sound of Freedom. If you're against the movie, then the fans of Sound of Freedom can simply claim that you must be okay with child trafficking. It's a simple, lazy, and uncritical way to feel safe in your beliefs. And if you're wondering how any of this could be dangerous, you need only look to Pizzagate. Pizzagate was a conspiracy in which a pizza parlor was secretly trafficking children and harvesting their blood. One of the believers in this conspiracy decided to do something about it and brought a gun to the establishment with intent to kill. That's why QAnon is so concerning. They're a cult that are one misread message away from enacting something dangerous by buying into unproven and absurd theories. So now that we know QAnon isn't just some boogeyman buzzword, what relation does it have to Sound of Freedom's star and figure? Jim Caviezel appeared remotely at a 2021 conference for Rhema Bible Training College, specifically to promote the film Sound of Freedom. During this appearance, he brought up aspects of QAnon. Tim Ballard, the central figure who Sound of Freedom is based on, also has a history of promoting QAnon conspiracy theories. This included the Wayfair conspiracy, which claimed that a furniture retailer was concealing children in furniture to be sold. During the film's run, Jim Caviezel and Tim Ballard also went on several shows to promote the film. And by shows, I mean the right-wing brand of outlets like Fox News, Glenn Beck, Tim Pool, and Jordan Peterson. During these interviews, they further pushed the adrenochrome conspiracy and tried to relate child trafficking to being a component of being gay and transgender. And as if that weren't bad enough, there's also a lot of less favorable promoters of this film. This includes racist Christian filmmaker Mel Gibson, failed tech mogul and social media destroyer Elon Musk, failed screenwriter and Barbie movie bemoaner Ben Shapiro, former meth dealer and YouTube chud Nerdrotic, disgraced professor and D-list Batman villain Jordan Peterson, disgraced and indicted former President Donald Trump, and the evangelical think tank and civil rights rollbacking group Family Research Council. So while the very content of the film isn't overtly pushing right-wing or QAnon conspiracies, it's still got a lot of bad fingerprints all over it, and Angel Studios has remained mostly indifferent about these concerning issues. If you have no frame of reference for where Sound of Freedom came from, you may think of it as little more than an independent film that rose from the depths and defied bigger studios. This is not entirely true, though. So the Pay It Forward campaign by the studio was meant for the audience to buy tickets for those who could not afford one, and apparently about $2.6 million of the initial box office gross came from studios encouraging their audience to overpay for the film, and coincidentally, that's the same number that it needed to beat out Indiana Jones on July 4th. But there's a major problem with this Pay It Forward campaign. The tickets that were bought seem not to have been claimed, but the purchases still went through anyway. This led to several sold-out showings containing many empty seats. This has been cited by numerous people, including people who are fans of the movie. So it's less like a rising of audiences going to see this one little movie against all the other big films, and more like the studio was convincing their patrons to help them astroturf the box office. And theaters have got to be angry about this. Sold-out showings with nobody in the theater means no concession sales. But theaters are also aggravated that conspiracy theorists are now encouraged to come. This has led to several Sound of Freedom fans believing that AMC was trying to sabotage their showing because the air conditioning broke. Yes, it sure is suspicious that the theater's AC wasn't working in the middle of, I don't know, the hottest summer on record. This led to AMC's CEO firing back at these ridiculous social media claims. Okay, so the box office was inflated, and the people involved in making this movie and promoting it were gross. But the film had so many people promoting it. After all, it's based on a true story, making it all the more important to watch, right? Yeah, about that. Sound of Freedom embellishes so much of the story behind Tim Ballard. The bulk of the film portrays him as a vigilant hero who infiltrates criminal dens and beats down the people who kidnap children. The American Crime Journal discovered that the case portrayed in the film had little involvement from Tim and that the details were highly fabricated. His group, Operation Underground Railroad, staged sting operations in several Latin American countries to rescue children. These sting operations were also documented with video recordings. Operation Underground Railroad claims they found long-term support for the kids that they rescued, but this was not true. According to Foreign Policy, several girls rescued in the Dominican Republic in 2014 were not cared for due to a lack of resources and were forced back out onto the streets. In many cases, OUR left the cleanup for the local authorities who either couldn't care for the trafficked children or were complicit in these crimes due to corruption. So to clarify, OUR was not some elite band of mercenaries who tracked child traffickers as the film portrays them. Many investigations have reported how the various sting operations were messy. The teams assembled were often donors with little experience in handling these situations. The intelligence gathered on finding child traffickers was inferior and kind of ridiculous considering that they used psychics to try to find the traffickers. Anna Gallagher, an expert on human trafficking, commented how OUR had, quote, an alarming lack of understanding about how sophisticated criminal trafficking networks must be approached and dismantled. This lack of insight led to the organization gathering poor data on their targets, misidentifying victims, and even confusing consensual prostitution with trafficking. Everything about OUR just makes it seem less like some devoted cause of saving children, and more like a bunch of amateurs who raided an army surplus store and want to pretend they're Batman, wanting to play vigilante, but never doing any of the less action-oriented work to ensure that child trafficking will stop. It should also be noted that when Sound of Freedom was released into theaters, Tim Ballard wasn't even a part of OUR. This news came directly from OUR's spokesperson who reported on his firing, but but only after the movie came out, which showcased Tim as the hero of OUR. Tim had not been the president of the organization for several months prior, and it was later revealed why Tim was kicked out of OUR. He had been accused of sexual harassment within the organization. Apparently, during his missions, Tim would hire women to act as his wife for a convincing cover, and then tried to force them into having sex with him. In one instance, he told one of the women working with the organization that she should sleep with him under the premise of going where it takes and doing whatever it takes to save a child. Yeah, gross. I'm going to repeat that last line with context. Tim Ballard, the central character of Sound of Freedom, the anti-child trafficking leader that the film holds up and wants you to revere for his efforts in anti-child trafficking, was kicked out of his anti-trafficking group for sexual harassment. This was so bad that even the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has condemned Tim's actions and can no longer stand behind him. Tim would try to deny this, but it's already been confirmed by Utah outlets. Tim is also trying to run for the Senate because, of course he is. Where else can a disgraced virtue-signaling sexual abuser go? Okay, but let's say for the sake of argument that, well, you're a piece of shit and you don't care that Tim Ballard sexually harassed women, or that he was kicked out of OUR, or that his religion disowned him. Perhaps you believe that it was all for the greater good of stopping child traffickers. Well, I'm sorry to say this, but Tim was also really bad at his job. In 2014, Meg Conley went along with Tim and OUR on one of their sting operations. Despite sharing the same religious beliefs and commitment to the cause, she grew with doubt as the mission continued. Her concerns started with how Tim wanted the entire raid filmed professionally, trying to pitch it as a reality show. She was told that she'd be part of the sting operation at a house where she would keep the kids out of the way. She would remain outside a trafficker's home at a pool with the children while Tim, OUR, and the cops would bust inside. But this is not what happened. Meg was still inside when Tim gave the signal and had guns forced in her face by local authorities. She complied as the crying children were led through the house, still wet from the pool. The housekeeper, not informed of the raid either, was terrified by the presence of people with guns. This was apparently a concern that Meg had, but Tim did not. Meg was mortified by this experience. Even though she remained supportive of the organization after that raid, her support would dwindle as time went on. She would reach her limit when a US State Department combating child trafficking criticized the actions of OUR. Tim would send Meg this article and called the author a bitch, demanding that Meg should write a retort. She ultimately refused. You can probably imagine how Tim thinks of Meg now since she's coming forward with all of Tim's terrible tactics. Later on, Meg connected with actual child trafficking experts and they were horrified by what she described. The way that Meg processed the actions of Tim was that he didn't really give a shit about stopping child trafficking in the long term. But hey, it's not all bad, is it? The film's still promoting anti-child trafficking. That's still a good thing, isn't it? Yeah, about that. At the end of the film, as the credits roll, there's a message to take action and spread the word about this movie. Not for the cause, but for the movie. A QR code then appears on the screen. The code does not send you to a website about combating child trafficking. It sends you to a page where you can buy more tickets to the movie. You know, with the way that this film ends, it sure seems like the studio cares more about promoting this film and not actually directing you to resources where you can do something about child trafficking. You might just be wondering why the film doesn't point you to OUR or Tim Ballard since they're right there in the film. But the reason that they don't is because OUR is a mess and Tim Ballard is a lying grifter. Having left OUR, Ballard turned his attention towards a new organization, the Spear Fund. The fund, supposedly, is meant to hire anti-trafficking experts for special projects. Did you like Sound of Freedom? Did you enjoy throwing extra money at it while pretending you're doing something about child trafficking? Then, hey, why not throw even more money at this fund? I mean, it's headed by Tim Ballard, the guy from the movie. So give Tim your cash and he'll find a way to fight child trafficking somehow. I initially thought that this was meant to fund a documentary on child trafficking, since Tim has said that he's working on one with Mel Gibson. But this was a lie, as Gibson's publicist has confirmed that he is working on no such project. There are so many people who want to believe that Sound of Freedom is some underdog movie, as though nobody wants to make a film about child trafficking. And again, this is not true. There are plenty of examples of far better films on this topic, such as the highly underrated You Were Never Really Here, and documentaries such as the one by Frontline. And if you're serious about child trafficking and you want to do more than virtue signal for a piss-poor movie, well then here are some resources and organizations that you can support. Because the truth is that Sound of Freedom is not an inspiring true story about one man who broke the rules and saved children. It's a revenge fantasy for both Tim and the conservative audience, who so desperately want to believe that a bunch of ragtag Christian freedom fighters will end child trafficking. They will not. And if we're being truly serious about this issue here, then we need to stop taking grifters and conspirators like this seriously.